Hey guys, welcome back to Voices from the Mausoleum. And in today's episode, this is going to be one of two where I talk about controversial horror films. I'm going to cover 4 total. I'm only going to do 2 in this video, and then I'll do 2 in the one that's going to come directly after. And I thought this would be kind of fun. So Shudder has, I'm probably going to talk about Shudder a lot because I'm obsessed with Shudder. Shudder has a docuseries called Cursed Films. And one of the films that I'm going to talk about, I think only the one, is actually covered in it. But I just think it's such an interesting perspective to talk about the impact that different things in cinema have made, not obviously just in their genres, but in everyday life. And so the first one that I'm going to talk about, and I'm pretty sure most of you already know this one's at least coming, even if you maybe don't know the rest of them are, is going to be The Exorcist. So The Exorcist came out in 1973. And for those of you who have not seen it, what are you doing here? Go watch it. It is definitely, I did a 30-second movie review on this one as well, which is incredibly, it's so hard to cram in only 30 seconds worth of opinions on The Exorcist. So The Exorcist is a staple horror movie. For a lot of different reasons. One, because of the content. It really set the stage for demonic possession movies. Spoiler alert. And then also not only that, but you think about like how many horror movies involved kids being the subject of the horror. We're not talking about Stephen King novels. That's a whole nother thing. But just in general, like it wasn't a super common thing in film. So The Exorcist was super controversial for its time. And I think it goes without saying that a majority of that is because of the content, because it has to do with demonic possession of a little girl. And I think on an even more real level, it has to do with just how normal this family was. I mean, you're talking about a little girl that literally was just the cutest thing and just so normal and had this pretty good relationship with her mom, and there was absolutely no, like, when you think of it, like there's no reason that this should have ever happened to them. And I think that made it a lot more real, aside from the fact that the practical effects, although there were some issues with the practical effects, but they worked really, really well. And for its time, it was just a huge controversial film. So aside from the demonic possession content in the movie, it actually had quite a few mishaps on set as well. For those of you who haven't seen my 30-second movie review, you should go watch it. It's on Facebook. I made a playlist. So there is a scene where Reagan's mother, because I cannot remember her name, is in the moment, is thrown across the room. And she hits a wall right under a window on the other side of the room. And her being thrown like that was very real. It was the actress. It was not a stunt double. And she actually got quite hurt in that scene. There's the scene where Reagan is in her bed and her body is very violently flipping up and down. The device that she's wearing to help her dramatically do that actually got stuck and pressed on her in such a manner that she actually broke several ribs. So her cries of pain and anguish in that scene are actually very real. And it was horrible. And then total, there were 9 deaths between cast members, people associated with the film, all before the movie's release, which was, it's a big deal. I mean, if it had been a movie about, I don't know, talking fish or horses and I don't know, any other happy things that you can think of, the 9 deaths would have seemed tragic, but probably not as terrifying. So there's a lot of controversy. People were really upset about the film, that there were these people who claimed to have been made so physically ill just by going to see the movie that they couldn't even finish it. People were running out of theaters, throwing up, which is crazy to think about now, considering all this stuff I've seen. But for its time, it was a really big deal. And I mean, it was even to the point where Linda Blair, the girl who plays Reagan, is actually had to have bodyguards because people reacted so poorly to the content of the movie and her acting in it, which is weird to even think about now. But yeah, so The Exorcist set up for a lot of other movies, a bit of a subgenre, I would say, even for Exorcist films, because there are a lot of demonic possession movies that came out of probably being very inspired by that film, even though the impact that it had on society was a little not good. So you're also talking about this girl's mom was a single mother. She was an actress. There was a lot of I guess sort of taboo things in that regard that it just people weren't super happy about it. It's probably like the first time they did a film with like a gay couple or something like that. People freak out. Anyway, so that's my first one, The Exorcist. Yeah, so for its time, The Exorcist was definitely considered a controversial film. It was even labeled a cursed film. People said all kinds of things about the impact it had on them after they saw it. There were rumors that if you read the script, strange things would happen to you in your home. You could get hurt after going to see it. People panicked. Like, I think it was a big conversation about just the boldness of the topic and the way that it was executed. And it was done so well. And honestly, even to this day, the subtleties that are there still hold such an ambiance when you're talking about building up a story and this like just terror in your gut, when you're watching a film. I think it still does that. And it is when I talk about scary movies or things that actually scared me, it's one of very few that legit scared me. I was very young when I saw it. It came out before I was born. But when I saw it for the first time, I was very young and it terrified me. I mean, the scene, even some of the more like the smaller scenes, but I think the two biggest ones that get me every time I watch it is where she comes down the stairs, which is an obvious one, I realize. And then of course the scene where she takes the cross and she stabs herself. And then shoves her mom's face. That whole scene makes me cross my legs every time I watch it. It freaks me out so bad. But it's really good in terms of content. I think aside from the practical effects and all the lighting and the noise and the music and stuff, I think, and makeup, of course, I think that the actors just bring it to make it more real. And I think that just added to the controversy, honestly. So that's my thoughts on The Exorcist and it's being a controversial film. So yeah, that takes us to the second film that I'm going to talk about in this video, which is Cannibal Holocaust, which came out in 1980. When I went back to see when it came out, because I've only seen it once, I will only see it once. When I went to look, for some reason I had it in my head that this came out like way before then. But yeah, it came out in 1980. And every time that I go to say it, I always want to say Hannibal Holocaust, which is not accurate. It's Cannibal Holocaust. If you're not familiar with Cannibal Holocaust, you're about to be a little bit more familiar. So it's essentially a story about these documentarians, these people who film themselves talking about things. They find this indigenous group of people who, and just a lot of really bad things happen. I think that's the short of it. It's probably the OG of found footage films in terms of what created the desire to do a film in that manner. It definitely set a precedent for found footage films, one that I don't know if I can think of one that's ever come close in terms of, part of the reason that style works when it works is obviously because if you're holding a camera and you're not using this big crew, then it's supposed to feel more real and more in the moment and you're closer to the action in theory. And I don't know, like it creates a very, almost like you're there, you're a part of it, I guess. And that makes it even more scary. But anyway, so I think that it created a big path for all these other found footage films that we have now. And some of them are great in their own way, but I don't know that any have no movie that I know of has ever gotten the attention that this one did, and in this way anyway. And then I don't know of any found footage film that was as effective. So it turns out there's reasons that some of those things are effective, talking about being real. One of the reasons that Cannibal Holocaust, said it right that time, is so controversial is because the effects of the death scenes or the murder scenes that involved people were so realistic that the director of the movie actually was charged with murder until they found the girl in question and she was able to prove that she wasn't dead and that was her in the movie and she actually wasn't dead. But like he was legit arrested on charges of murder because it convinced people that that's what they had done for the sake of a movie. And in some ways it definitely was because there was a lot of animal slaughters and this is one of the reasons I'll only see this movie once. I have a very soft spot for animals. When animals die in horror movies, I'm devastated, which is why they do it, right? Only now there's all these laws and things, and people who would jump down your throat if you even looked at a cat wrong in a movie, let alone murdered a pig and a turtle and a monkey and like all these other things. So they kill several animals. And one of the saddest things that I read that I actually did not know is the scene with the monkey was actually shot twice. The first time that they went through it, the shot wasn't what they wanted it to be, and they refilmed it, which means that they killed 2 monkeys. And there's a really brutal scene with the turtle. The turtle it's a very rough movie to get through. It's very nauseating, especially knowing that it's real, that the animals that die in that movie were very much alive, that they went through that torture, like all of that was very real. In addition to the animal slaughtering and, the obvious themes that are associated with the movie, there's also a lot of sexual violence. And not that there's, before 1980, it's not like there was never a movie that didn't have sexual violence in it, but the scenes are pretty horrendous for the time frame. I mean, we have movies out now that, there's one that I won't see because I've heard so many things about the rape scene that's in it. I think it's Last House on the Left, maybe? It's a really drawn out scene, and it's pretty graphic and stuff. And I don't get any entertainment out of that, so I'm not going to watch it. But anyway, but sexual violence is definitely something that makes people very uncomfortable. I, for one, have walked out of movie theaters that have had sexual violence in them if it's bad enough. Hills Have Eyes 2. Those are really hard to get through certain scenes. But yeah, so it's super controversial. Aside from the whole concept of seeing, this other, I guess they're sort of like, they're a tribe of people. And just watching what happens to these filmmakers and these animals and these women, the film was pretty raunchy in terms of its content. And it leaves a mark on you long after you've seen it. The man that directed it, I'm sorry, I don't know his name. I don't know what his name is. I don't remember. Before he did Cannibal Holocaust, he actually worked in the adult film industry, which I don't really care so much about that, except for the fact that I think that's such an interesting jump to go from, presumed consensual situations like that for adult filmmaking to something just as horrendous as, Hannibal's every time, Cannibal Holocaust is a pretty crazy jump. And I feel like it probably just kind of adds to the notion that I'm really glad that we have outlets. Can you imagine if Stephen King didn't write books or let his books be turned into movies and he had no outlet for the things in his head? He'd probably be a serial killer. And we could watch a documentary about him and chill. Yeah, so I think Cannibal Holocaust is a rough one. It's rough to talk about. And if you haven't seen it, it is entirely up to you if you want to put yourself through it. It's a very rough movie. But in a lot of ways, it definitely created inspiration for other films. Thankfully, we have the things in place that we do that prevent animals from being treated that way. Even though I'm sure bad things still happen sometimes because people are shitty. But yeah, that's Cannibal Holocaust. And that's going to wrap up episode 1 of Controversial Horror Films. The Exorcist, 1973, and Cannibal Holocaust, 1980. Have you guys seen Cannibal Holocaust? I'd love to know your thoughts on it. I don't disband people who say things like it's a work of art. In its own way, it really is. It influenced so many things, and I think maybe even it might, it might have even have influenced the fact that we have so many restrictions now on how animals can be treated on sets. Maybe it did, I don't know. But I think it definitely has its place in the history of horror, as it were, and a pretty valuable one. And The Exorcist, of course, we already know how I feel about that one. That one's super important. So, so that ends part 1. Hope you guys had a really good week. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I will see you in the next one. Good night.